Hello and welcome to It's Your Time You're Wasting with, and this is where I've got to quickly do something very clever, which is to do that. Martin Robinson and David
Hello.
Dido.
Hello, Martin.
Hello,
It was going to
David.
be slick for a moment, but you put paid to that.
Well, doing the producer job and a presenter job sometimes confuses me. I'm not quite
Yeah,
up to speed yet. I'm still
no.
learning to drive.
Thank you for your work. Thank you for your service, Martin. Right.
Thank you.
How have you been?
Um, I'm still glorifying in the Tottenham victory. But I'll get over it.
Yeah, something will happen, won't it?
Well, guaranteed. Something will happen.
So, if only, Martin, if only the production and the presentation of this was done by AI, it would all be very smooth, wouldn't it?
It would certainly make my job easier because, well, I mean, would it make life easier if I was completely replaced by AI? It would certainly make your life easier if I was,
I think
perhaps.
so. Yeah. You'd probably be easier to get hold of.
I, indeed, I would be always there as some sort of bot,
Like a genie in a bottle.
a genius in a lamp.
So we're talking about AI, Martin, and we're going to be talking about Martin. We're going to be talking about AI, and before we do so, people should subscribe and like and that kind of thing. Uh, but you've got a story.
It's not much of a story. It was 10 years ago. I was in Shanghai and
Yes.
doing a talk. And in that talk, I talked about the possibility that one day it might be the thing that teachers prepared their lessons through some sort of robot would prepare their lessons, and some sort of robot would set everything up for the student to do, and the student would go away and get a robot to write the essay that they were asked to do, or whatever work they were asked to do, and then they would bring it back and the teacher would then get another robot to do the marking for it. That everything, the whole education system would be farmed out to some form of, which I didn't know at the time, of artificial intelligence. I didn't know it'd be artificial or intelligent, but the possibility that that might happen. And I think we've actually got to that stage now where it is possible for the
Mm.
entire job of education from the point of view of a bureaucrat could actually be done really easily by AI doing the entire thing, setting the work, doing the work, and marking the work.
Yeah.
And we've reached that.
Well, it certainly appears we have.
And is that a good thing?
So tell me, Martin. 10 years ago, you hadn't heard of AI.
I might have done. I might have done, whether it was called
You hadn't
AI then.
seen. You hadn't seen Terminator.
No, I hadn't, and I still haven't.
All right. We all heard of it.
I've heard of it. I've
You
heard of
hadn't
it.
seen 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I had seen that, but it wasn't called artificial intelligence, was it?
How?
Hell, yeah, that's not called artificial intelligence.
Isn't it?
No, it wasn't called AI. It was called HAL. You just said
Yeah.
HAL.
Yeah. Did you know where the name HAL came from?
Go on then.
So it's one each of the letters are one removed from IBM.
Ah,
Yeah, they're
there you go.
one. Yeah,
I
there you
feel
go.
like an ape just discovering a new sort of.
Yeah, you've just picked up a thigh bone. Yeah, so according to there was a an article that went viral from New York Magazine on the fact that everyone's now cheating their way through college. Vast numbers, everybody's using ChatGPT to write their essays and complete their projects,
Mm.
and so on and so forth. My daughter sent me this um, because she's adamant. She has this real hatred for ChatGPT and AI and doesn't use it at all. And she was
Same with my
using
daughter.
interesting, good for them.
On
Good.
ecological grounds, I think it's the number one.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's definitely part of the argument that a search using ChatGPT takes 10 times the energy as a Google search.
But of course, how much does it take to stay in a library and look up things through the catalogue and
Well,
with the heating, the lighting? I mean, if you added it all up and the amount of time it would take, and if everyone was doing that,
you could just wear a warm coat, maybe.
socks on the radiator used to be a thing in the old. Not my socks, I hasten to add.
Right.
Anyway,
Well, on that bombshell. So we're wandering from ancient Athens to AI generated essays, from Heidegger's hammer to handwritten exams. A lot of H's there, trying to pin down what separates mind from machine. We're going to get help from some unusual sources, Martin, as well as Socrates. We're going to hear from Pete Seeger, who
Pete
knew that would
Seeger.
happen,
I do like a bit of Pete.
and Alison Gropnik, Daisy Christodoulou, David Engelman, and all sorts of others. So, Socrates is your speciality. You love a bit of the sock.
Okay, well, Socrates teaches us, or taught us back in the day, that he was a big worry about the written word and
He was, or at
the threat of
least
it.
he was probably Plato's sock puppet, wasn't he? Sort of in Plato's The Phaedra, he tells the story of Socrates' anxiety about the written word. How does it play out?
Well, are you actually suggesting that Socrates could be made up?
Oh, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that all we know of him
He's an
is,
artificial construct.
yeah, could be,
Yeah,
could be. Yeah.
but yeah. So the thing about the importance of memory, of knowing stuff, if you like,
Yeah.
he was worried that if you put everything into writing, that this sort of dissipates that the need to know stuff, that we actually know less because we've written it down, or we rely on the written word. But actually, I think it's proven to be the opposite, that actually
Yeah.
writing things down has increased knowledge rather than decreased it in any sense.
Well,
Which,
it's interesting. I mean, I think it's an interesting one because I think that so in the Phaedrus, Socrates is retelling the myth of the curse of Thoth, the Egyptian god who gives writing to humanity. But King Thamus warns that, as you've said, writing will weaken memory and give only the appearance of wisdom and not true understanding. And and in a way, this is a valid concern because for Socrates, I think he sees reading as passive, as knowledge coming from interactive dialogue and critical questioning, and he was also worried that just writing any old stuff down for anyone to read is dangerous because anyone could find something out. I've got a little quote here. This invention will produce forgetfulness in the minds of those who learn to use it because they will not practice their memory. Their trust in writing, produced by external characters which are no part of themselves, we'll pick that up later,
yeah,
will discourage their use of their own memory within them. And,
yeah.
I think he was right. Reading
No,
does one
well,
thing.
there's also the alternative view, of course, that what writing has done has increased the knowledge of mankind, humankind. We're not
Yes.
reinventing things, reinventing old things to learn each time. We actually standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. That whole idea that knowledge begets knowledge begets knowledge.
Yeah.
We get more knowledge because of it, which he's not thinking of. But whose knowledge? This is it. The intrinsic my knowledge
Yes.
is quite a strange idea anyway, because how much of our knowledge is our own knowledge, our own
Yeah.
invention, and how much of it is the invention of other people that we have learned along the way?
No, I think that's right, and I think that all those years ago, I think that that particular view of reading and writing is quite utilitarian. It's quite sort of it's not thinking about the richness that's possible to interact with as a result of the written word world. And but there is an important distinction between what one may know. Personally, last week we were talking about Iman RTM finding out that many people seem to know practically nothing about the world around them, despite this huge cultural edifice of knowledge that they could tap into.
They could access it, but funny enough, I'm sure that, and this is the question that's been asked in schools recently, which is now being changed by AI. But why do you need to know something if you can Google it?
Yeah,
That's gone even further now with AI. But it's funny, quite a few of the people he asks questions to in those videos have their phone in their hands, ready
yeah.
to, ready
Well,
to.
quite often they'll he'll ask them something and they'll go, "No, that's not right," and he'll say, "Google it, look it up,"
Mm,
and they go, "Oh my goodness."
yeah, but we also, I mean, so from writing, then
Mm.
goodness knows what Socrates would have made of the printing press. But talking about what the printing press led to, of course, arguably, the pamphlets and everything else when people, democratized knowledge to some extent, and perhaps the Enlightenment flowed from the ability of the technology to move us forward.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. I think that we can get a reasonably good a reasonably good guess at what we certainly know what the conservative authoritarian views on the printing press were, because we have some contemporary records of people being quite anxious about the grubby, unwashed masses getting their hands on printed material, and
It
and
could lead to socialism or something like
lead
that,
to
couldn't it?
all sorts of terrible behaviour. The church, you'll be unsurprised to hear, wasn't a fan. And interestingly, the idea of books and manuscripts, obviously, manuscript comes from writing manually. The sorts of people, the princes who collected books, all wanted handwritten. And so, for a long, long time, printed material was seen as very much inferior. And then, of course, you have the later invention of the steam printing press, which really revolutionizes and galvanizes cheap access to text. And it's then that you get a huge spread of ideas. But the church weren't wrong to worry. Look at Martin Luther. Surely his revolution against Catholicism, at least in part, was dependent
Oh,
upon
you
the
mean that
press.
church? That church was worrying, but other churches were made because.
Oh, quite,
So
quite.
which church, eh? Which church? Whose
Yeah,
church? Whose church? And all that.
all
Right. So
church.
we is AI, a logical extension of these things, and are the arguments the same that Socrates was bringing to, all these other things, the library, the printing press,
Yeah,
all these other things?
yeah.
Are we in the same place of the book is a
Well,
threat,
I
AI is
think
a threat?
I think what I might suggest is that I think that Socrates is correct in that our capacity as individuals to hold vast amounts of knowledge in our heads personally is really diminished. We don't need to. We outsource it to books or other repositories. And so that there is little doubt that that has had an impact on and has shaped our brains.
Can I just pick you up on one thing? I don't know if
Yeah.
we outsource our knowledge to books as readers. We're inputting the knowledge, if you like. And I'm trying to avoid computer language, but
Mm, mm, mm.
we're but I didn't. So we're inputting from this, so we're getting access to more knowledge than we would have had without it.
No, that's true. That's true. But the fact that we don't have to carry it around in our heads, the fact that so
Right, but
you
it's
know
like,
about
sorry, can I make?
Umberto Eco's concept of library? Have you
Yeah. So go on.
that a library should be full of books that you haven't read?
Yeah. but they're possibly there to read. But
Yes,
they're right. So all these books around me, we've got
they're potential knowledge.
that potential knowledge that I feel safe in, knowing that the fact that I haven't read them, but could do should I so wish, or should I
Yes.
need to access
And
certain
also,
things there.
if you do read them, it doesn't matter if you forget what was in there because you can read them again.
Yeah, but the vast amount of knowledge in an average library is more than anyone would know in their lifetime
Maybe.
of certain types of knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the factoids put about was that at the time Newton came up with his theory of gravity and things like that, that he had read all of the scientific knowledge that at that point existed in the world. And that's no
Which
longer
was
possible. No.
compared to
Whatever it was,
today.
he'd read it.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course, not that much
right. But
comparatively.
he did something important with it, and we'll actually come to
Yeah.
that at some point. Okay, it isn't new. AI isn't new then. I mean, well, it is new. Go on. A brief history of hype.
Oh,
Can you tell
okay,
us?
yeah. So, I mean, so as a concept, it's been around for a while. We've had some false starts. There was in the '60s. There was a computer program called ELIZA, which was meant to be interacted with by patients who would give them psychological readings. There were various expert systems that had great promise in the 1980s, followed by something that's sometimes called the AI winter, where we believe it all fell apart and we realized that it wasn't working in the way that we thought it would. So there's the potential for some people to say, well, we've been here before, we just haven't got the same kind of marketing and exposure that the current open AI paradigm has. That there's no doubt that what large language models can do is new and extraordinary, but is it intelligent? Is
Right.
the really key bit. And you've been listening to a podcast, haven't you, with where Alison Gopnik has interviewed
Gopnik.
David
I think it's Gopnik. I'm not.
Gopnik.
Yeah, I
Apologies,
think so.
apologies, Alison. Interviewing David Eagle.
The other way round. He's interviewing her, but again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Well,
But
I
the
haven't been listening to it, so can you tell me? Can you teach me what they were talking about?
so so the interesting thing she comes up with, and
Yeah.
she's done research into this as well, and it's perhaps worth looking at that. Not today though, but
Right.
for people to follow it up on, is whether
We'll put a link, won't we?
it's whether it's a category error to call it intelligence.
Yeah.
Um, and she prefers the term cultural technology or a
Okay.
tool.
Yeah.
And so it becomes part of the history of, of what we've just been talking about, the
Yeah.
book, the library, the pen, the paper, all these things are, its forebears, if you like. And therefore, it's a tool for us to use rather than seeing it as some sort of threatening idea as an alternative intelligence. Is it intelligent? I mean, it depends very much on what you call intelligence,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you could consider it not to be intelligent. What it's good at is just accessing a lot of information. And if all intelligence is information gathering and
Yeah.
sharing and sifting through, summarizing, connecting, it does
Mm.
all those things, but is it actually intelligence? What makes us intelligent? There are other arguments which we'll come on to perhaps about consciousness, whether artificial intelligence could ever be conscious, and therefore what is human,
Yeah. Can it turn into Skynet
or
and
turn into a
wipe out
human.
humanity?
So I don't know. There are some interesting things there if we do consider it to be a tool. And
Yeah.
that is where I come on to the Pete Seeger quote,
Yeah.
where he talks about whether we're the maker or the tool. So this is his Ballad of Accounting, which is, I'm not going to sing it. I'm not going to get my
Oh, go
guitar out.
on.
You will be pleased to know. But they teach you to question when you were at the school? Did the factory help you? Were you the maker or the tool? So whether we become the tool of AI or whether AI remains our tool, perhaps is the threat somewhere along the line, that we can be manipulated by the society around us. Becomes we find ourselves, in a call center, being manipulated by AI to get what it wants rather than what we want out of the call, or something like that, perhaps. But generally, if we think of it as a tool, it can be a useful tool, can it not?
Of course. Obviously, Pete Seeger. Anyone who's recently seen the recent Bob Dylan biopic, have you seen that, Martin?
I think it's wonderful. I,
Yeah, it's great. Pete Seeger, played by Ed Norton, and he's presented as a bit of a luddite, isn't he? Musically, sort of resisting the advance of electric music, electrically produced music. He was a purist.
yeah,
So,
the, the,
at
the
what
Luddites can
point
always
does
stand in our way.
yeah? Well, at what point does a guitar tip over and become an electric guitar? At what point does the tool take over? And I guess that would have been something that Pete Seeger might have worried about.
Yeah, and interesting, I suppose, now that you get to the point where you can go and see a concert where I was going to say a singer can have their voice sort of made to be in tune, and all these things through AI,
Auto-tuned, yeah.
auto tune. That's the word. But sort of AI can do all this sort of stuff. Then I was just thinking, I went to see Bob Dylan last
Mm.
year in concert, and my goodness, there's a man who could do with some tuning to his voice. It wasn't out of tune exactly, but it wasn't what I'd call
No,
an easy listen.
it wasn't melodious, and yeah, yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
but anyway, let's not denigrate his Bobness.
No, okay,
Uh,
fine.
so yeah, the other
So the
thing
idea
with
of tools, yeah, I think that's an interesting point. A book I've recently been reading is The Notebook. It's called The Notebook: A History of Thinking on Paper by Roland Allen, and he's sort of tracing this idea of writing as a tool, and the fact that being able to write things down is an enormous advantage. He sort of talks about the effect that had on things like banking, through being able to keep accounts, and all sorts of other examples. And if we are thinking about writing as a tool, and there's no doubt that ChatGPT or its Grok or whatever they're called, these can be interesting and effective tools. There's been some real concern recently. I say Grok, about it. About it seems to have been programmed to sort of be racist. Have you come
No, it's
across it?
not. It's the problem with these things
Yeah,
is they follow humankind, and they're gathering what humankind has said in the past, or whichever sources they're using, and the
yeah.
biases of humanity therefore come through. What
Well,
these
that's
things
the argument,
Well,
but
hang
is
on,
it
hang on.
true?
These other thing about it is that Grok et al. Do not have morality, not in a human sense.
No,
They are immoral. I was going to say beings. They're not beings. They're
no.
not a thing. So human judgment, human. Well, you see, this is the thing about thought. Is thought something that is completely
I'm
information based, or
yeah,
is it
yeah,
something that's linked to our sensitivity, our sensibilities, our
yeah,
our nervous system, if you like?
yeah. I'm not making an argument about AI being moral immoral. I'm making an argument about the people responsible for programming it being moral or immoral.
But
And
right,
with
but I
Grok
don't know
in
if they are
particular,
programming it to be immoral, but
well,
because it's
okay,
it's
so
learning itself, isn't it?
well, is it? Is it? Because it used to be the case that you could ask Grok about Elon Musk, and about his whether or not he spread lies and misinformation, and it would confirm that he did. And quite recently, it's now denying it,
Oh,
and
right,
it's
okay.
and in response to really anodyne queries like, what time is the football match on tonight? It's saying, well, have you considered white genocide in South Africa?
Right.
And
Okay.
so,
I don't use Grok, so I
no,
wouldn't
neither
know
do
these
I,
things.
and I think you're wise not to.
But
Um, but
I can imagine that there could be somebody saying, "Oh, it's doing this. Perhaps it should do this," and then
yeah,
going in. But I don't think people understand who make these things exactly what's going on because it starts to learn
no,
itself. Have you ever
I think
heard
you're,
two AIs talk to each other
yeah.
when they come up with that language of the AI language? I mean, it's quite extraordinary to
Oh
listen.
no, maybe I haven't. Sorry,
All
what do you
right. So if you get an AI to talk to an AI, so
right?
two phones together
Yeah,
or whatever it is, they will say, "Hey, are you an AI too?" Yes, I something like that. Shall we use whatever language? I can't remember. It's got some sort of technical name. Shall we use blah blah blah? Yes, and then it goes into their own language, which is completely
oh
unintelligible
really?
to humans.
A bit like Finnegan's Wake.
Well, something that's completely unintelligible to humans. Yeah. Poor old James Joyce. There you go. But
He'd not have come
that's the
to.
sort of book you've got on your shelf that you've never read,
No, I've never read Finnegan's Wake. I've
but you've got
tried
it
a
on your
couple.
shelf.
I don't know. I
You
have
actually
read
haven't got that
Ulysses.
many books on
Right.
your shelf, have you? You've got about 7 by the looks of it.
Yeah, I've got the Anatomy of Melancholy.
Well, that's all you need, really.
Yeah, I
That's
know.
that says it all.
This is good. Arthur Koestler, Ghost in the Machine, which is that there's
They're
a man.
indeed.
I know,
They're
yeah,
indeed.
writing about these things long before they became an emerging reality. So, um,
So the big
so my,
thing.
so that my concern is, Martin, is that you know that we've talked about the democratization of knowledge. Maybe we're seeing a shrinking of that idea with these large language models in the hands of a very small number of very, very rich individuals who may have the power to shape and control these tools to an extent where lies and misinformation become our diet,
Yeah,
and there's no
and
way.
I mean this is like the concerns people had with social media in the first instance anyway, even though it's us using it, is who was not allowed to use it or who gets pushed up the dial so more people
The
see
algorithm.
the algorithm. Yes,
Yeah.
pushed up the algorithm. But even that, of course, the algorithm itself can make these decisions itself based on some of the things it's been asked to do. But it's
Right.
certainly a
And that's the
concern
key.
about that. So
That's the key bit.
democratization of the public sphere is quite an issue that if the public sphere is being put online, then how much of that
Well, I think
is
so. I
right?
think just to summarize where we've got to, I think there are two things going on with this tool. One, that nobody really knows how it works, and it's making some decisions which we don't necessarily understand how it's come to the conclusions it's come to, and we can talk about some of that, some of the examples of that in a moment. And secondly, it is there are mechanisms by which billionaires may be able to manipulate these things to their own selfish ends.
And there's also the issue there of whether we realize it or not.
Wow.
So it's the thing with even with a book, of course, even with a newspaper or wherever you get your
Yeah, no,
diet
for
of
sure. Yeah.
information from is how do I know this is right? How do I know it's wrong? How do I exercise judgment in this space, especially if I'm using a hell of a lot of information all the time and therefore quantity
Yeah.
is surpassing quality. Uh, okay, what can AI not do? I think is quite an interesting area because going back to the
Yeah.
Gopnik and Eagleman, what
Yeah.
what Gopnik is pointing out that what it does very well is imitation. It can imitate what is out there. It can say this, that, and the other, um, and it reorders and all those things, which is
Yeah.
part of creativity, if you like. But what it doesn't do is come up with innovative ideas. It doesn't create something that is that we could say, like you talk about Einstein or whatever,
Mm.
taking on all these things and then coming up with E equals mc squared. It doesn't take that leap.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
it's obviously
wonder.
takes that leap because Einstein's already done it, but it doesn't come up
No.
with the new leap. Now, at some point, in terms of data and
Yeah.
in medicine and things like that, it can come up with insights that we can't have because of the amount of
Yes.
information it goes through. That's not what I'm talking about in this
No.
instance, but it certainly can help us again as a tool
No.
to then take imaginative leaps ourselves on the information it provides to us. Eagleman talks about this in the Animal Kingdom, but he talks about
Oh,
80% of what animals do is exploration, but about 20% of what they do is exploitation, coming up with new things from their explorations. So, sorry, I think it's the other way around. No, it's not. It is that right. It is
yeah.
that way around.
Okay.
Sorry, 80-20. Yeah.
No. Well, there's also sort of mathematical modelling that has looked at sort of human knowledge generation over the course of history, which suggests that the balance between types of the idea is that learning is inefficient. Time for us spent learning new stuff is time that we could spend finding food, finding a mate, so on and so forth. And so it makes sense to assume that we will attempt to find the minimum amount of time needed to learn how to do stuff. So there are two modes of learning: social and asocial. So social learning is essentially copying. Like, what's Martin up to? I'll do that. Martin seems to be eating some berries. Where did he get them? I'm going to watch it. Okay, that tree. That
And
kind
he's
of thing.
still alive.
He's still alive. Maybe I could eat the berries. Asocial learning is trial and error. So if there's nobody about, nobody to copy. That looks like I might be able to eat it. Obviously, quite high risk. Maybe it's poisonous, and so the balance. It used to be believed that the balance between social learning and asocial learning we needed for a community to be vibrant was about sort of 80%, 20% in favor
Yeah.
of social learning. But recent mathematical modeling has suggested actually the percentage of asocial learning required is less than 1%. It's tiny. And in the modern world, almost all of the learning that almost everybody does almost all of the time is social learning. We copy
Copying.
pretty much all of the time, and then we employ a tiny number of people to spend a tiny amount of their lives being innovative.
All right. So, well, then the implication is that if AI is doing all the copying for us, we can spend more time being innovative.
Maybe. Although I think that if we go back to the point made about Newton and him having read all of the science that existed at the time of him coming up with his scientific theories, that there's something important about containing this information in your head, that knowledge doesn't become knowledge until it lives and breathes inside you and you can think with it as well as about it. And that is probably an important precondition for having insights and innovations. If you've outsourced the thinking and you're just observing what an AI is coming up with, can you really be insightful and innovative? And I'm doubtful of that.
Right. You're saying there about outsourcing thinking.
Hmm.
Now, you go into the library.
Yeah,
That is a huge outsourced
it
resource of thinking, if you like.
It is other
You've
people's
still got
thoughts.
reading. You've still got reading of the AI or listening to the AI. You've still got absorption of what it's giving you. So you're not taking that out of the scenario, are we? We're not taking thinking out of the scenario.
Well, so if it's consuming and digesting and summarizing information that you don't know about and you don't understand, how are you going to make sense of what it's suggesting?
Well, that's the same with a book, isn't it?
It is the same with a book. Yeah.
So which is worse?
I'm not making a value judgment here. I'm just saying that that you asked me
No, no,
if
no. I
if AI is
understand.
doing
It,
all of the exploration for us, does
yeah,
that not leave us with more time
but
and opportunity
that's
for insight?
going back to the idea that Socrates was worried about. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
same issue, isn't it?
yeah. And so my position is he was right to worry, and we're right to worry now that I think it's no, there is little doubt that our minds will change as a result of all of the things that are happening around us at the moment. Whether
Mm,
that turns out to be awful or whether, in the case of the book and Socrates, the benefits have far outweighed the costs, I think we'd agree. But he was right to say things will change, things won't be the same. That's true.
mm. It's it's the idea here of what's in your brain
Yeah,
and what you actually
yeah,
know is quite an interesting one. And
it is.
does it have to be within the skull to be your knowledge? So we get into,
Mm.
I think, David Chalmers and Andy Clark's work on extended mind here, where they had,
You love this, don't you?
I love this. But so you've
Yeah,
got two people looking in New York. This is the
yeah.
days of the 90s, if you could imagine such a time,
Hmm.
last century,
I
where
literally can.
people didn't have Google Maps. So
Yeah.
that's an important thing. So you've
Hater's
got,
heads. Remember those?
uh, anyway, we've got Otto, and I've forgotten her name. I'll call her Lenya just for the sake of it.
Okay.
Otto and Lenya. Um,
Otto and Lingy.
Whoever. Yes, that's why I'm thinking it.
Yeah.
There we go. Anyway, she has got in her brain how to get from her apartment to the Museum of Modern Art,
Yeah.
and she knows where it is, blah, blah, blah. So she
Mhm.
goes there. He has got Alzheimer's. So he's written down in his notebook
Yeah.
how to get there from, some study, and keeps referring to the notebook in order to ensure he gets there. And he
Yeah.
gets to there like that. Now, they're saying it's the same information that they've both got.
Yes.
Therefore, because his is outside of the skull, is it part of his mind?
Mm.
It's obviously not part of his brain. We're talking about mind. So the information that the mind has. Now, they said this is extended here. If you were to take that notebook off him and rip it up, that would be an act of cruelty.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
Now, therefore, it's a controversial idea, but they say the mind is extended there. There is information that we're using from outside our head, which is helping us to navigate the world. Now, Heidegger and people like that would say, well, that is how culture works. Information, there is so much information outside of our minds that guide us, that help us
Yeah.
get through. Now, with the mobile phone, that is most obvious now. That
Yeah.
actually, I mean, I used to 3823. That was my mother's phone number back in the 80s.
Hmm.
Yeah. Now, I've still got that number there. I
Yeah.
can remember my mobile phone number because I have to write it down a few times for other people, but I can't remember other people's mobile phone numbers. So
Do you
I
remember your
have,
wife's or your daughter's?
no, I know, I just use it.
Yeah.
I know their
Yeah.
name though. So
Yeah. Yeah.
because I know their name, I just go
Yeah.
deep like that. So, you know, unbeknown to me, I have outsourced knowledge
Yeah.
that I used to keep, which might even be in there at some point. I haven't bothered remembering this stuff, so
Yeah.
it's not there. So it's more effective, really, in some ways. I don't have to rely on me just in case I get forgetful or
Mhm.
whatever. But if someone nicks my phone, I'm effed.
Do you have those moments where you can't remember your phone number?
I haven't so far.
Oh, really?
I do get
Every now and
moments where
again,
I
I'm
can't
thinking,
remember certain things, though.
I
Of
know
course,
this. I give it out in so many different contexts to so many different people, and then every now and again, I can't remember it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Talking
That's
of
just me.
Alzheimer's, anyway, Otto is there. But I remember my uncle before
Mm.
he died. God bless him. Um, he had
Lord
around
Levin.
his home. He had Alzheimer's, so
Mm.
around his home he had post-it notes with various
Yeah.
things about how to get around, what he had to do in a day, and where everything was, and things like that. And this is his mind, not brain, mind. These are the things that resources he used to get through the
Ah.
day.
Have you ever
Now,
seen the Christopher Nolan film Memento?
no, but go on.
So the central
He's
character in
great,
that.
Nolan. I think he's great. Anyway,
Yeah, well,
yeah,
I think maybe it's his first film. I'd recommend
yeah,
it. Guy Pearce plays the central character who has, experiences memory loss every day. He wakes up, can't remember what he did the previous day, and in order to remember, he tattoos instructions to himself on his body.
yes,
Uh,
yeah. I've heard of it.
Y-
Yeah,
yeah, and so like the twist is, maybe the tattoos have been misleading, and all the rest of it. But quite an interesting way of outsourcing memory. Good
yeah,
film.
yeah.
All
And
backwards. A lot of fun.
of course, a lot of things like these outsourced library that I'm sitting in your book on melancholia. All
Yeah,
these things here are an extended mind, or extended knowledge, if you like, of where we would be without this is much diminished in
yeah.
terms of our cultural, social, intelligent selves. It would be diminished if we were just relying on what our own
For
thoughts
sure.
were. Um, so, and we're doing it in such a way. And this is where Heidegger's hammer comes in, if you like. In
Tell us about Heidegger's hammer.
Heidegger's hammer. So it's something to hand. If you're going to hammer in a nail, you just take the hammer and you bang it in, and you do it thoughtlessly. Well,
Mm.
you're thinking about where to put the nail and things like that, but you're not actually thinking of the hammer all the time. Or Heidegger's doorknob, shall we say that? This is the
Yeah, yeah,
same
yeah.
thing. You go towards the door and open the door, but you don't think too much about the doorknob, do you? You just do
Yeah.
it.
So,
It's to hand. It's something literally to hand. You
yeah.
use and open it. So all this information we're making to hand, we're not really thinking
Well,
about too much
can we
about
stop and
books,
think
about
about
anything
the
else.
hammer for a moment?
Yeah.
So, the first time you pick up a hammer, the first time you encounter a hammer, you probably do think about it quite a lot.
More so
So,
than later.
pardon me?
More so than later, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you have to think like, what? How am I going to use? Like, let's give a slightly different example, like a bicycle. So, can you remember? Can you remember learning to ride a bike?
I do, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And it was tricky, right? Trial and error.
Yeah,
F-
I remember being quite successful quite quickly, but I don't think
Wow,
that
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 doesn't
might be my
surprise me.
memory going wrong.
Okay, but I can remember. I can remember not being able to ride a bike and having stabilizers, and I can remember taking the stabilizers off and having this wonderful experience, this incredibly freeing experience of being able to ride my bike unassisted, and
Yeah.
it was marvelous. And at that point, you no longer have to think about the bike.
Now I'll put one other proviso on this, and that
Mm,
is he says you know about the hammer when it goes wrong.
right,
So when you suddenly hit
right,
your thumb,
yeah,
that's when you're
yeah,
aware. You
yeah,
suddenly become aware of all this
yeah,
thing. So again, AI, we can be,
right.
it can flow over us all the time. But when
Okay,
something information comes up that's wrong, and it sticks out like a sore thumb, that's not right. That's when we
okay.
notice perhaps these things about
So,
information
I mean,
around us.
I'd like to connect Heidegger with Michael Polanyi, who, for those who don't know, late great British Hungarian polymath, really interesting character. And one of them, he's most famous for writing about and thinking about tacit knowledge. But he talks about the idea of subsidiary awareness, that when you've got a hammer in your hand, if you're using it to hammer in a nail, most of your awareness is on the nail, not on not on holding the hammer. But as you say, if you switch that awareness, either by accidentally hitting yourself in the thumb or thinking about, as we sometimes do, oh, I'm hammering, what's this like? That we can switch our attention so that we always retain a bit of subsidiary awareness of the thing in the back of our mind, but we have this primary awareness of what our purpose is and what we're doing, and we can consciously or unconsciously slip between the two. And he talks about the idea that knowing isn't just having information, it's the process of subsuming it into thought and judgment and skilled action. And that I think, obviously he's writing many years before we're worrying about AI, but I think what he might say is that the more we offload memory, the more we risk a severing of the connection, and producing people who have facts at their fingertips, but they can't think with them.
Yeah, and whilst one can agree with this, of course, one could also say the same thing about Encyclopedia Britannica. That so how much are we talking here about threat or tool, helpful tool, and
Okay.
is
Well,
there a
let's
balance
let's
between those positions?
let's talk about the. So, if I'm going to have a fact at my fingertips from the Encyclopedia Britannica, I've got to look it up. I've got to read it. I've got to understand what it means, and then I can do something with it. If I if I'm set an assignment as a student, I can copy and paste the assignment into ChatGPT. I can say, produce an authentic looking response written in the style of, an 18-year-old, for whom, who's got a partial understanding of this. Don't make it too show offy. Make it a B rather than an A, and I can get the response without having done any kind of thinking whatsoever.
Yeah, and you
And
could
that's
have
a
done.
bit different.
It's not a bit different than copying it down from a book.
It's not a bit different from that. But if I'd copied it down from a book, what would happen? I'd be told off.
No, if the teacher noticed. I mean
Yeah.
that's
So,
the thing. You've always
but
been able to copy. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
actually earlier you were saying that copying is really important.
Copying is really important.
No, but
And so one of the reasons, and just to go back to that, copying, mimicry, it is really, really important. And one of the reasons why we actually need a little bit less trial and error asocial learning than we initially thought is because of copying errors. And that a lot of innovation comes back from copying, which is wrong, but actually successful.
so we keep hitting our thumbs.
Yeah, in good ways. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, okay. So that this threat of AI and this usefulness of AI
Yeah.
is a challenge to schools, and
Oh,
that's
for sure.
where we're coming to really with this is if should we just ban AI?
Mm.
Even if we say we ban AI, doesn't mean it's not being used by somebody
No.
along the line. If we do ban AI, do we do it just ban it for students, or do we ban it for students and teachers? If we're just banning it for students, but teachers are using it, is that fair? And should students know that your teacher's using it actually, even though they're denying you the access to those things? So what do you think?
Well, I don't think it's possible to ban it. I don't know how you'd ban it.
And on that note,
How would you ban it? What would you
well,
do? Sort of close
you
it down?
say you can well some obvious things in the classroom you can ban it.
Oh, okay. So should you use it in the classroom? Right. I mean, that's a different question.
No, but it's part of it,
Should
isn't
be
it?
allowed to use it? Because I don't think you could stop them.
Right, outside of the classroom and inside the classroom. So
Yeah.
let's have those two parameters.
Okay.
Inside the classroom, number one.
I think that that certainly in most classrooms, that we're increasingly schools are embracing the idea of banning mobile phones and not allowing students, not forever, but in the classroom. And it would be quite unusual, I think, for teachers to be saying, hang on, I'm just going to ask ChatGPT how to teach this part of the lesson. So I think that it's not unreasonable to say you can't use AI during a lesson in the classroom. But if I, as a teacher, have set an assignment for which a student can go home and use ChatGPT to produce a response to that assignment, then that's on me.
Is it cheating?
In the old days, do you remember this, Martin? Where we'd say,
I remember the old days.
Do you remember FOFO?
Yes.
Fuck
I,
off and find out.
yeah, we had
And
FOMAP. We've talked about this before. I'm sure
have
we
we
did on
really?
group work, but our group work session, we talked about
Okay. Did we?
FOMAP and FOFO. Anyway.
Okay. And so children would go off and sort of copy something down from Wikipedia or whatever it is, and would bring it in, and you'd read it and think they don't know any of this. They've just copied it from a
Yeah, cut and paste.
yeah. And the difference now is that we don't know. It's not we can make some. The only way that we find out is by talking and
Well,
doing that critical inquiry and
right.
those things that Socrates thought were important.
And this is interesting. I mean, without mentioning the oracy word, says he
Yeah.
mentioning it, perhaps talking has a place in the classroom more now because of it.
Absolutely. And
I did
I definitely think in higher education, it's going to have to be prioritised. There's going to be far more vivas needed, even though that's quite time efficient. My eldest daughter, who's doing training to be a primary school teacher, most of her assignments are oral presentations.
right.
So she can use AI to help her learn the material, but she's got to learn it at least well enough to be able to give the presentation.
I
And
mean,
that's probably better than just saying hand in something that's been written by AI.
I of course love all this because it's modelled around the trivium, all these ideas. But I remember setting an essay on Brecht, and a student wrote her essay on Brecht and was
Yeah.
comparing it to car mechanicry. And I remember sort of reading this thinking, this is a bit odd. But my main concern and my main line of questioning to her was what she knew about car mechanics.
Yeah.
Because she seemed to be making this, and she copied it all down from a book, but I was unaware of the book. But
Yeah.
through questioning is how I unraveled, and she unraveled. I unraveled her sort of knowledge of car mechanicry to be zilch.
Right.
Now, I can't remember what it said. I mean, I'm sure she
No.
can't remember. But
Oh,
this thing about not
intriguing,
knowing
though.
things is quite
Yeah.
important. But it doesn't mean that you use ChatGPT, you don't know something.
No.
But if the teacher is aware that the student might use it, should the teacher encourage them to use it, but use it in a way that is constructive?
I think you can do that for sure, and it depends on as a student what you want to get out of the process. I think that's going to be quite an important part of it. So, for instance, I think you could encourage a student to use ChatGPT to help them write better. You could say, put in the thing that you've written into the chat box, ask it to give you a sequence of tutorial instruction about how to improve the piece of writing that you've done, and then act on it and check whether or not you've got better.
Which is using it as a tool, not as outsourcing intelligence.
Right. Yeah, exactly
Okay.
that. So I think that for teachers, using it to plan your lesson from scratch, probably a bad idea. Using it to help you come up with really, to put in a text that you want to generate some multiple choice questions for, probably a good idea, probably a real time saver. You've probably still got to read through and check that they're coherent, but it's probably going to it's probably going to pay off for you. And I don't have, in theory anyway, I don't have a problem with that.
Daisy Christodoulou wrote something about her concerns on a Substack
She did.
about this. What was her conclusion?
I mean, broadly, her conclusion, I mean, she's giving advice to the curriculum and assessment review panel that's currently cogitating on what curriculum and assessment ought to look like in England. And her advice on assessment is particularly that we should have more handwriting.
Right. And that is because of the threat of AI? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's because there's been a move. I was part last year or maybe the year before of a group of people that Ofqual had got to discuss, how we could digitize exams and the discussion's already moved on. That whatever the pros and cons of digitized exams might be, uh, the the issue that students could conceivably use chatbots to write their responses without having to engage in the material at all obviously undermines the purpose of the exam. And so one of her points is now that a lot of the advantages that we might seek to get through digitization are not at odds with handwritten examinations. That we can turn handwritten transcripts into digitized text incredibly quickly and easily. We can then we can get the benefits of AI to help us assess those reliably and validly, and so we get all of this technological assist without necessarily putting at risk the integrity of the examination
because the examination's trying to find out what the child knows
and can do.
and can do. Now, interestingly, a couple of
Yeah.
months ago, I saw someone had exposed a student of theirs for cheating in an exam, which was a handwritten exam, but they were wearing Google glasses or
Right.
those things. I mean, they confiscated their first pair of glasses for
Right,
this
right,
sort of
right,
thing.
right.
I mean, if it gets to the point
Yeah.
of having an implant in the head, which
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
cheating?
Well, is it, it's, I think we think it is, don't we? Because obviously we could look at sport as who's got access to the best steroids and just let things go. But we've decided that we're going to ban performance boosting drugs and disqualify people who take them because we want to see what they can do without
But if
those.
everyone had that input,
Yeah, well, exactly. And if everybody took steroids, then maybe it'd
well,
be
yeah,
a
would
level
that be a
playing
bad
field.
thing physically? Well, you might say it is. It is.
Arguably, we've developed a drug for which there are no downsides. Should we just let everybody take it and then see who's best on the drug?
But
Yeah,
this comes
it's
down
a,
to, do we
it's a
need to
similar
find out who's
argument.
best? I mean, this is another thing
Yeah,
about what exams are for. But if we all had the
well,
input,
kind of exams are for
and
that. Aren't
and then you just sort of plugged in the information they want you to know, that information could be used as a tool. And
they? Yeah,
again, we could be looking at what you do
yeah,
with it more than just your memory of it.
yeah. Well, conceivably, but in terms of how currently exams are put together, how they're designed, had you an internal implant which gave you access to a large language model, it could do the thing with it. You wouldn't need
Mm,
to do that either.
it's fascinating, isn't it? Um, Phil Beadle wrote something.
He did. Good old Phil. We love Phil. We've also interviewed Phil.
Yes,
Let's
yes.
put a link
Gosh,
to
that
the
was.
Phil interview.
Yes, we did. We did interview him. So
Yeah.
should put that fascist painting
Yes.
interview up on our program notes underneath in the
Yeah.
commentary. What was he writing about? It's something he got. Didn't he get
He got ChatGPT to
to
write
write?
in the style of Phil Beadle.
There you go.
Yeah, I know. I before the show, I knew we were going to talk about this. I asked ChatGPT to tell me how I might go about writing in the style of Martin Robinson. And this is what it told me what your writing style is, Martin. Tell me what you think of this. It says best seen in his books, Trivium 21C, good book, recommend it. Curriculum, Athena versus the Machine. I've read that. And it's also saying you've written a book called Reality Bites, which I don't think you have you?
No,
No. So
there's no
we'll
reality
talk
there.
hallucination in a moment, maybe. But it says of your style that you blend intellectual seriousness with a kind of classical contrarianism. His voice is distinctively high-minded but mischievous, fusing deep respect for tradition with a sharp eye for modern nonsense.
I think the modern nonsense is
Hey,
or just
does that
nonsense.
does
That's
that
basically
does that?
saying I talk nonsense.
It's not saying that. It says you've got a sharp eye for it, Martin. Do you recognise that?
I don't know. I mean, I think this whole thing, Chat
Yeah.
GPT, does like to massage one's ego.
Yeah, there's been some of that as well. Here's my
What did it say about
ego.
you? Go on.
Well, it says my
Talking
writing
about
style is,
massaging egos.
yeah, it's crisp, challenging, and skeptically reflective. I write as a teacher who's seen through the promises of bad theory and weak evidence and now wants you to see it too. My voice is that of the honest the honest iconoclast, weary of bullshit, allergic to fads, and impatient with certainty. That's me, that is.
There you go.
That's certainly how I'd like to present myself. So, to that extent, um, there's something there.
So
Whether or not I'm trying to,
how should one live in the age of AI?
well,
How
so
can we live, exist, and do?
well, it's an interesting one. So obviously, Phil wrote his piece and then did the AI version after it for us to compare and contrast. And he points out the fact that the AI article produced this superficially meaningful response written in a voice that he kind of recognized as his own, but contained factual errors that he was only able to spot because he knew the material it was writing about really, really well. I think he got it to review an album, didn't he? Something like
Yeah,
that.
something like that.
Yeah, and and it said it referred to a descending scale, and he was like, "Hang on a second, there isn't a descending scale in that song," and
Mm.
so he was able to spot
Yeah,
just in
yeah.
the same way that we know you've not written Reality Bites,
Yeah.
and so
Well,
we can,
that's perhaps I should just to
yeah,
keep up,
perhaps
or
you do.
should I get AI to write it for me in my
Um,
style?
But I mean, this is it. So I was reading another article on Substack by Will Storr, sort of story writing expert.
Ooh.
Very fortunate that he's got the name Storr there.
Store.
He
Yeah,
can
I think
do a lot with that. And he wrote an article called "Scamming Substack," where he's picked out something that he's referring to as gruel, where there are these wildly virally popular essays that all follow a very distinctive pattern, where they'll say something pseudo profound about whatever, and just have this impact where on first reading you think, not along thinking, yeah, that's me, that is, almost like Rorschach blots of meaning, until you realize actually it's unsatisfying pap.
Isn't that like TED Talks?
Well, very much probably like TED Talks. I wrote a piece this week on the M dash, which lots and lots of people. I'm certainly not taking credit for spotting that AI assisted writing is filled with M dashes. M dash is a long dash, so named after the length of the letter. It's the length of the letter N in typography, and that I'm a big fan of the dash. I didn't realize until reading about this controversy. I've never knowingly, deliberately used an M dash because I didn't know how to. So I asked ChatGPT how one uses an M dash on a keyboard, and you have to hold down various keys and do various things. And there's a community of writers out there on social media going, "Oh, it's not fair that we're all being tarred as being AI robots. I've always used M dashes." And maybe there's a group of people who have always been holding down control and typing 1501 and getting it. Maybe. I don't buy it though. I think that's bullshit.
So it could be that Substack is entirely written by AI. Everyone's using AI on it. People are using AI to read and have summaries of the Substacks out
Well,
there. So
and
the entire thing could be.
how long is it before books are entirely written on using ChatGPT?
It's interesting that Elton John this last week was objecting to the use of AI in music
Right.
to write new music and things like that. So the entire catalogue, he wants music to be taken out. But he didn't have the same objection for writing, interestingly enough.
Well, he's not a wordsmith, is he? That's Bernie Taupin's bag.
There you go. Perhaps Bernie could teach him something about that. But of course,
Maybe.
if we all took all the writing out of AI,
Yeah.
they wouldn't have much left to talk about, would it?
No, and you can, and lots of people are recognizing the fact that these large language models are being trained on their content and
Yeah.
And are ticking the box to supply themselves. So I
Well-
noticed a few months ago that Mumsnet had asked to be excluded from large language model training.
That might be a good thing for us all, though.
I think probably.
And on that note,
On that note, yeah, on that note. So on that note.
You want to say
phone's
something else?
ringing. My phone's ringing. So perhaps, Martin, the question isn't whether AI will replace us, but what kinds of experiments it invites us to take part in. There's no doubt it can help us to write better. Can it help us think better? Can it help us teach better?
And it's that thing about maker and tool. It's
Yeah,
making
are we
sure that we are in
outsourcing?
control of it and it's not in control of us.
Yeah, are we outsourcing what it is to be human, Martin?
Definitely a problem.
Or not. Maybe we'd all be better off. Hard to say. Anyway, there's some pseudo-profound bullshit to end with.
That's your writing style, I remember.
There you go. There you go.
Oh dear, it's been fun.
Well, yeah, and thank you very much, Martin. Thanks everyone for wasting yet another hour of their lives with us. We'll see you again next week.
It is over an hour as well. This is very good bank holiday fun. So
yeah,
take care out there.
bye all.